Through a lot of blogs and sermons for this website, I've spoken a lot about my recent medical issues. And while I bring it up again, those issues are nothing but a backdrop for what I really want to talk about in this introduction. There have been two friends with whom I've been able to be in my rawest emotional state, and know that they're more than willing to listen. That's not to diminish the presence of my actual family members, or the handful of other prayer warriors who have been in my life, but my struggles have had intense moments. And without specifically these two friends, I don't know how I would have gotten through the beginning months of this year. They've always been willing to listen, ever ready with a shoulder and a prayer. And that's regardless of the fact that one of them got married during this time frame, and the second one should be a new father by the time I upload this sermon. The two of them aren't just my friends. They're my brothers. Brothers in faith, sure, but there's a brotherly bond that transcends our unrelated genetic coding. And in the midst of my suffering, having two individuals with whom I could share my grief has been life-saving. It's all the more amazing that our friendship has been long intertwined with a shared faith. There's a covenant between us, the covenant of Christ that truly binds us as brothers. I share my thankfulness with these two friends because I couldn't help but be reminded of it when I researched the chapter for this sermon. And although the specific covenant between the two men of the biblical story had a more direct application, they too shared a covenant with the God whom they served. Up until now in our series called A Song of Failures and Hope, for which we've been going through the book of Samuel, we've seen the rising hope and eventual downfall of Eli, Samuel, and Saul. And right now, as the failure of Saul takes on villainous tones, we've witnessed the rising hope that's in David. He's defeated Goliath, the personification of human wickedness that God's chosen king will destroy. He's risen in the ranks of Israel's army. Everybody loves him, except for Saul and the occasional lackey and royally useful idiot. We've seen Saul go from side-eyeing malcontent to murderous schemer. And in the last sermon, Saul's deathly plans for David became publicly known. Jonathan seemed to talk his father out of posting bounties for David's head, but once the prince left Saul's presence, kingly hands rubbed greedily for selfish and homicidal plots. David had to run away from Saul again, first to his home until David's wife Michal fooled her father while her husband ran away, then to Samuel in Naioth of Ramah. Yet through it all, Saul continued to chase his anointed prey, but God stepped in to protect his chosen plan that flowed through David. Now, as we turn to 1 Samuel chapter 20, we come to David's attempt to find reason and purpose behind this king's madness. And in his sorrowful suffering, he heads to the one friend who's closer to David than his own biological brothers, Jonathan. 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 1 to 10. Then David fled from Naioth and Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life?" And he said to him, "Far from it. You shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It is not so." But David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he thinks, do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." David said to Jonathan, "Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit at the table with the king. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field till the third day at evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the clan. If he says good, it will be well with your servant. But if he is angry, then know that harm is determined by him. Therefore deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself, for why should you bring me to your father?" And Jonathan said, "Far be it from you. If I knew that it was determined by my father that harm should come to you, would I not tell you?" Then David said to Jonathan, "Who will tell me if your father answers you roughly?" Before we get too deep into discussing this passage, I feel it necessary to point out something that's missed if we only know the English translation. One of the more common ways that people who spoke ancient Hebrew expressed importance in their words was repetition, whether that be actually repeating the words or making a parallel statement while utilizing synonyms. This is the reason why the Hebrew Holy of Holies can be translated as Most Holy Place. Repetition heightens the point of the whole, and it happens a lot in the Hebrew language of the Bible. Of particular note for our passage is a grammatical aspect of the language called the infinitive absolute. Now, you don't need to understand the intricacies of the term and its meaning, but for explanatory purposes, let me say that it was a form of the verb that's like a near-sounding repetition of the word that gives an intensification of meaning. It's like saying he asked askingly to mean he pleaded, and we might also include the adverb unceasingly just to expand the idea in the English's translation. Basically, it's a linguistic form of adding swelling background music. And I bring this whole thing up because, while you'll come across the Hebrew's infinitive absolute on a regular basis throughout the Bible, in 1 Samuel chapter 20, they overflow so highly that anyone reading the original language would be drowning in the flood of intensity. Like those moments in film where the sound editor forgot that people actually need to be able to hear the dialogue. This chapter bombards us with the intensely raw emotion of these events. We have to hear the intensity if we're to understand the words. So I feel that it's necessary to begin my discussion here by describing the deafening background music that's been muted by our translations. And instead of bogging us down with a reminder every time it shows up, which would happen more than once a verse sometimes, just imagine the most heartfelt and intense swell of emotional music running through every verse as we go through the passage. With that said, let's remind ourselves of the previous events that led us to this place before we actually get to the scene. Remember, David's been on the run from Saul. Groups of lackeys fell before God and prophesied his words. And indeed, even Saul came and fell before the truth of God while prophesying. Tearing off his kingly robes in the presence of Samuel and David, Saul spoke the words that God needed him to hear. And with this moment still fresh in David's mind, he ran from Naioth and Ramah. He knew that Saul wanted him dead, but David couldn't figure out why. What had he done, other than be a faithful and loyal follower for both God and Saul? Little did he know that it was that joint loyalty which made the king so angry. So, in his questioning sorrow, David ran to Jonathan, the man with whom David had spent so much time together that they might as well have grown up with one another, and also one of the few people who stood regularly in the presence of the king. This is why David begins his plea with the questions of what did I do? And what fault has Saul found in me? Because there had to be a reason for Saul to seek David's life. Now, before we talk about Jonathan's words, there's another repetition that we need to discuss. This one is the repetition of a specific word used multiple times throughout the first half of this chapter. We miss it in our translations because there's a broad range of meaning for the word that's translated as life/soul. David's sorrowful concern is about how Saul wants to take his life, and so the word appears over and over again, right up until we get close to the comfort for that concern. I'll point out the word again when we get to verses 3, 4, and 17. So David raises his concern and Jonathan questions how that could be. The crown prince uses a phrase with legal implications of an oath. Something like, "Let me be profaned if your words are true." A more refined version of, "No way, Jose." He'd already talked with his father about this madness of seeking David's life, and Saul had promised his son that the whole thing was settled in favor of David being safe in his presence. There had to be some misunderstanding. After all, Saul never did anything without consulting Jonathan first. He was like #1 advisor. But unfortunately, Saul's promises don't hold the surety of God's covenant with his people. And this was one of those few things that Saul never discussed with Jonathan. David says as much. Saul knows how tightly the bond of brotherhood held between the two of them. The king wasn't stupid enough to let Jonathan in on his plans again. And then David swears this truth, as the Lord lives and as Jonathan's very soul lives. I told you we'd get back to that word for soul/life. Here, David's repetition of oath and the use of Jonathan's very life/soul is again used to intensify his argument. He wasn't kidding around here. This was truly a life or death situation for him. He's a split second from being murdered, and he needed answers and comfort. Jonathan then does what all good and godly people should do when they see their friends in sorrowful dilemma. He stands ready to do anything necessary to help. Jonathan's response is, "Whatever you need," or literally from the Hebrew, "Whatever your soul says, I'll do for you. That life which you fear my father wants to take, I will stand to protect it. Tell me whatever you need because the answer is already yes. Here I am. I stand with you." And so David comes up with a plan. There was going to be a big festival the next night, and it would last for a couple of days. Of course, the king's royal bard and the hero of the state should be right there, at the same table with the king. But David's not going to be at that feast. Instead, he'll be hiding. And Jonathan's role is to gauge his father's response to David's absence. If Saul questions where David is, then Jonathan will give him the excuse that David earnestly asked, which is an infinitive absolute using the verb from which Saul's name was taken, thus emphasizing the repetition of Saul's name's connection to the verb. Another poking of fun at the fallen king by the human author of these words. Anyway, the excuse was supposed to be that David earnestly asked for leave so that he could go to a yearly sacrifice with his family. Then, if Saul accepts that response, it proves Jonathan is right. This whole thing has been a misunderstanding. But if Saul is angry, then David's point will be proven, and he needs to get as far away from the king as humanly possible. Now, because David knows what's going to happen, he pleads with Jonathan to do this favor for him. David continues his humble stance by calling himself Jonathan's servant, over and over again. And he also reminds the prince of their covenant with each other. It's important to note that with biblical covenants, it is often between a greater and a lesser party, one with greater standing and one with lesser standing. And David points out that his covenant with Jonathan, which was made shortly after David slew Goliath, was between the lowly shepherd boy and the crowned prince. Thus he was obviously the lesser person in the covenant. This just continues to showcase the humility of David throughout this part of the book of Samuel. Humility that's good for all of God's people. And so, sworn over their covenant with the Lord, David begs that if there had been some fault in David that made Saul seek his life, then he would rather die by the hand of his friend. This is how serious he is about his innocence. He says, if there is even one thing that I have messed up in my service to Saul, then you kill me yourself. But again, Jonathan says, far from it. Let me be profaned if I would keep any sort of secret like this from you. That would never happen, David. With the surety of truthfulness between the pair, David asks how Jonathan would get the message to him about Saul's disposition. So Jonathan takes David to the field where the message would come. 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 11 to 23. And Jonathan said to David, Come, let us go out to the field. So they both went out to the field, and Jonathan said to David, The Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father, about this time tomorrow or the third day, behold, if he is well disposed toward David, shall I not then send and disclose it to you? But should it please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan and more also, if I do not disclose it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die, and do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Then Jonathan said to him, Tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed, because your seat will be empty. On the third day go down quickly to the place where you hid yourself when the matter was at hand, and remain beside the stone heap. And I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I shot at a mark. And behold, I will send a young man, saying, Go, find the arrows. If I say to the young man, Look, the arrows are on this side of you, take them, then you are to come, for as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the youth, Look, the arrows are beyond you, then go, for the Lord has sent you away. And as for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever. Jonathan takes David to the field where the answers will come, and he swears by the name of the Lord that no matter what the outcome is, he will let David know. He's hoping for the positive side, but fears that he will be sending his friend away sometime in the next day or two. But notice the part that Jonathan adds if Saul is displeased by David's absence. May the Lord do the same to Jonathan, and more so, if I do not tell you. Jonathan's placing a curse upon himself if he doesn't stand true to his covenant with David. There's no game for the throne here between them. No secret rivalry, no plot of betrayal. That much David can count on. Then Jonathan says, May the Lord be with you as he was with my father. This is a way to secretly say something that would only be obvious to the two of them, and that is, Long live King David. Let God be with you, David, in your kingship, just as he was with my father, until the point that Saul rejected God, that is. Jonathan's saying something deep here. The crowned prince is telling another person, another man, Let your reign be long, and let the Lord be with you in it for the entirety of your reign. Jonathan knows that this loyalty could mean his own life, just as David's loyalty to the plan of God could mean his life. But in case Jonathan doesn't die by the hand of his father, he pleads with his brother in faith to not be another loose end to die by the new king's hand. See, one of the things that new kings tend to do, both in the time of the Bible and among kings throughout the ages, is kill off rivals. Leave no one to threaten your kingship. Not your brothers, not your cousins, not your old king's relatives, anyone who tries to vie for the throne, who even has a chance to unthrone you, kill them. That's the wise thing to do. This would be especially true of a new dynasty wiping out the direct line of the previous king. Like the crowned prince, it would only be wise in the eyes of the nations around Israel for David to kill Jonathan and his sons once David ascended the throne. Why leave rivals alive? You kill them off so that you don't have to worry about someone stabbing you in the back. But Jonathan begs his friend to remember their covenant when Jonathan comes to stand as the one in the lesser position. They are soon going to switch power levels in this covenant, and Jonathan asks that his friend keep the covenant faithfulness of God at that time, just as Jonathan remembers it now. He's asking his friend, when things turn around on us, please be just as faithful to me as I am to you. This word for covenant faithfulness, the faithful love of God, God's holy grace, His overwhelming mercy to we who are humble enough to know that we don't deserve it. This word can't be translated into English in a way that gives us the fullness of its meaning. And this word is another repetition of the passage that we'll discuss. It is intricately linked to covenant. It's the favor bestowed from the greater in the covenant to the lesser. The gift given, not because the lesser deserves it, but because the greater chooses to give it. Between Jonathan and David, this is the loving kindness first shown when Jonathan bestowed his royal vestments to David. And it will continue as David shows Jonathan's line a mercy that no other new dynasty ever would show to their rivals. Between we who follow Jesus and our God, this is the grace shown on the cross, proven in the resurrection. The act of covenant lived through Jesus, who dwelt among us, the one who is full of grace and truth, as John 1:14 states. In actuality, you can't talk about covenant without this faithful love, nor can you talk about this faithful love without covenant. They are united in such a way that when you see one, you have to understand the other. It's a part of God's love that so many miss today as they seek to separate His love from His covenant with us. And what we witness here in 1 Samuel 20 is an image of what happens when we come to God in covenant. When we cease trying to be the one in the greater position and instead humbly seek the lesser place. Covenant humility. Both men in this text showcase covenant humility. Both place the other in the greater position. And while we'll never actually be in the greater position of covenant with God, even Jesus humbled Himself for us. When we ask God for His grace, His mercy, His loving kindness, we are placing ourselves in the lesser covenant position and pleading for Him to be true to Himself, true to His mercy, His grace, His loving kindness. That's what this chapter reminds us of, the grace and mercy of God, even in the midst of our suffering and our sorrow, His covenantal love as we stand in covenant humility. Both these men in this passage show us the way. We see it again in verse 16 as Jonathan makes another covenant with David, this time with Jonathan as the lesser party. May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And these enemies do not include Jonathan, the soon-to-be deposed prince. They swear this covenant on the godly love that they had for one another, the bond of their life. Yeah, the word for life and soul once again. Right when the comfort of covenant shows itself, we see this last time for David's concern for his life, because the covenant is the comfort for his concern. Just as God's covenantal love, which is shown through Jesus, is comfort for every concern that we have in life. Might not feel it at the time, but it is true nonetheless. In life and in death there was this covenant between Jonathan and David, and in life and death there is comfort in the covenant between us and our God. Nothing will change the faithfulness. For David and Jonathan, it's because they both stand in covenant humility together. And for us it's because we have Jesus who humbled himself for us, and we who stand in covenant humility before him. And with this example of covenant humility shown to us, Jonathan then moves on to explain how he would get his message to his friend, explain the practical application of this covenant, of this love, and of this humility. Jonathan explains how he's going to get his message to his friend. David should, in a couple of days, go to the hiding place which we saw in the last sermon. On that appointed day, Jonathan will take a younger page with him, and his bow and quiver. He would shoot 3 arrows, and what he said to the lad who was going to fetch them would determine David's actions. If Jonathan told the boy that the arrows were on this side, then David could come out of hiding and return to his place in the royal court. But if Jonathan said that the arrows were further out, if they were away, then David should run for his life, because Saul seeks it. But regardless of his response, because Jonathan could be sending his friend away forever, or possibly be facing his own death and be put on the chopping block for his covenant loyalty. Regardless of this response, the covenant between them stood. They adhered to the plan of God, no matter what the outcome was. Anyone looking into this situation from a human perspective would call this crazy. Both sides should never agree to these terms. A prince should never side with his father's usurper, and a new dynasty's king should never let the old crown prince live. But when it comes to godly covenantal love, human perspectives will always see it as crazy, like how sinners can stand before a holy God, vindicated, righteous, holy, regardless of our faults and failures. We see this plan go forward in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 24 to 34. So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food. The king sat in his seat, as at other times, on the seat by the wall. Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Saul's side. But David's place was empty. Yet Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, surely something has happened to him. He is not clean. Surely he is not clean. But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, why has not the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today? Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, let me go, for our clan holds a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away and see my brothers. For this reason he has not come to the king's table. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman! Do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame, and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. Then Jonathan answered Saul his father, why should he be put to death? What has he done? But Saul hurled a spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. And Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had disgraced him. The scene is set. The camera passes over Saul, seated with his back to a wall so that no one could sneak up on him, his paranoia showing. Then the camera pans past Jonathan, and then Abner, the latter being Saul's cousin and general. And finally it passes an empty seat, David's place. Saul frowns. Why isn't he here? What could cause this son of Jesse to be absent at this grand festival? But notice one thing about the way he thinks of David. Saul calls him, even in his own mind, the son of Jesse. This is the way that Saul would almost always refer to David from now on. Not by his name, but as the son of Jesse. It's a derogatory way for Saul to speak of his rival. Not only does it distance Saul from his son-in-law, but it also reminds David of his own lowly status. David had used the phrase son of Jesse as a term for his humility, and now Saul uses it to force that humility onto David, to belittle him. Plus, we'll see that Saul likes to call people a son of something, as his own way to belittle every single one of them. But Saul keeps these thoughts to himself for the first night. He considers that David must have some ceremonial uncleanness, because the ceremonial cleanness was important to the feast, so maybe he would keep himself away because he's good according to the law. Saul's plot could kill the son of Jesse could wait another day. But when the second day of the feast comes, and David's still not there, excuses fail in Saul's mind. This can't just be coincidence. Has to be a reason. Has to be some plot. Something like what I would plan. And Saul expresses his displeasure. But on cue, Jonathan states the excuse. David had asked to go to a traditional family sacrifice. At this, Saul's nostrils flare, his anger hotter than a fire, and he turns it on his own son. Notice that Saul uses that son of slur again. But this time, he calls Jonathan a son of a perverse, rebellious woman. I don't think I want to explain how deeply into foul language that Saul's words are here. Just imagine the worst term for a woman that you know, and hear Saul call Jonathan a son of one of those. Okay? Saul knows all about the first covenant with David that Jonathan had, how the crown prince had placed that crown on the head of another. And Saul acts just like all other human perspectives do when facing covenant humility. How could you ever agree to those terms? You know that the son of Jesse is the one who stands between you and being king, Jonathan. You know that, right? Are you ready to give this all up for him? For him! The king you bow to. Find your reason, boy. Get him and bring him here so that I can kill him. And clear this mess up for both of us. I'm doing this for you as much as for me, Jonathan. Actually, Saul's words at the end of verse 31 continue the repetition of Saul's son of motif, because he calls David a son of death. He will be a son of death. It's a threat that also belittles. But Jonathan doesn't do as his father asks. Instead, he asks the questions that David started the chapter with. What has David done? Why should he die? Saul's had enough. He had to stick someone with the spear, so why not Jonathan? And apparently, Saul's bad at aiming, or God's protecting Jonathan as he's protected David, because the spear misses for what I count as the 4th attempted throw mentioned in the Bible. But now Jonathan understands the truth, and in his own anger, righteous anger, he leaves the table and eats nothing for that entire day. Food would never sit well with this news. His grief matches David's own. Sorrow builds within him, and Jonathan needs to send his friend off for what might be the last time. 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 35 to 42. In the morning, Jonathan went out into the field to the appointment with David, and with him a little boy. And he said to his boy, "Run, find the arrows that I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the boy came to the place of the arrow that Jonathan had shot, Jonathan called after the boy and said, "Is not the arrow beyond you?" And Jonathan called after the boy, "Hurry, be quick, do not stay." So Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master. But the boy knew nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. And Jonathan gave his weapon to the boy and said to him, "Go and carry them into the city." And as soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. And they kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. Then Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord shall be between me and you, between my offspring and your offspring, forever.'" And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. On the scheduled day, David hid by a large stone, and Jonathan came out with what had to be the heaviest bow he ever held, both of them wanting the response of everything being good, but both of them knowing what was going to happen. The arrow flew, and with a heavy sigh, Jonathan yelled out, "Is not the arrow beyond you?" But grief and sorrow overtook Jonathan for what the words meant. He ad-libbed his part of the act. He adds the words, "Hurry, be quick, do not stay." A triple repetition that meant things were worse than they thought, worse than they feared. Don't just go away, David. Flee for your life and don't look back. You can almost see the tears forming in his eyes. Tears he had to fight back so that no one was the wiser. No one could know that David had gotten a message. To the boy who went to get the arrows, it probably seemed like the prince was a little impatient, and he probably ran a little faster than he needed to, though those words weren't for him. Once the boy returned, Jonathan handed him the bow and quiver. "Take these back with the same haste, lad." And he waited for the coast to be clear. The second that it was, David almost fell out of hiding. He took the role of the servant once again, bowing, face to the dirt, before Jonathan. "I don't deserve your covenantal love." But Jonathan was just as taken in the moment. He probably ran to his friend and his brother, and I see him sliding on his knees to David, finally allowing the tears to flow. They joined in an embrace and a kiss between friends and brothers. The point has to be made for the sake of certain people, but the Hebrew here literally says that they kissed as a man with his friend. There is no sexual tension here, just the closest of friends weeping together over what this meant. A civil war brewed, one wrought by the God that they both served. the God which pitted them on opposite sides. As far as they knew, this could be the last time they saw each other, at least the last time not on the battlefield. And the truth is that other than one brief meeting in a few chapters, this is the last time that they are both in each other's presence, fast friends made briefly after a battle, who now hold fast to their covenantal love, regardless of the fact that another battle brewed ahead of them. The next recorded words of Jonathan, in verse 42, might make us scratch our heads. He tells David to go in peace. David's heading off as a fugitive of the kingdom. Their tears for this sorrowful parting have not stopped running, let alone dried. How can David go in peace? It's the same reason for the comfort in his questioning. It's the peace of God, the wholeness that he brings. That peace brought to us because of his covenantal love doesn't require a lack of hostility or affliction. Peace doesn't mean that everything's going right for us. Paul would later write in Romans 5, 1-5, that we have access by faith to this grace of God, his steadfast covenantal love, because of Jesus. And we can stand in sure hope, rejoicing also in our sufferings. Not that they happened, but we rejoice because God shows us his glory while those afflictions produce in us hope through endurance and character. We find peace because of that covenant with God, wholeness because of his steadfast, undying, unending, unyielding love, his covenantal love, as we continue to stand in our covenant humility. Jonathan can say, "Go in peace," because he knows the covenantal love of God as much as he stands sure of the covenant between him and David. A covenant built with humility, with character, which has already been being built up in both of them. They stand in sure hope of the peace of God brought by his covenant. God's plan, his glory put into action, is sure. And because they both bow to the work of God, joining him in it, they can have peace, regardless of the brewing civil war that will soon come to pass. We see in them the truth of the theme that's been running throughout the book. Despite the problems of this life and the human evil that brings them about, God's king will reign and bring restoration to his humble people. Their covenant humility, with one another and with God, works right alongside God's plan, and it will bring restoration to those who bow before the cross of Jesus, the ultimate chosen king, and also the one who is the son of David. This is all despite the trouble brewing and the human evil represented by a raging king named Saul. David can sorrowfully go in peace because he knows the security of God's covenantal love, grace that leads to a sure hope of God's restorative plan despite the falling tears. Our souls can rely on the covenantal love of God, rely on the fact that his grace extends to all who bow in covenant humility. We might stand on the side of the lesser party when it comes to the covenant with God, but his loving kindness will never disappoint. We will have to stand through trials and troubles, difficulties of this life. But with God, the only reason that we will ever need to not stand is when we choose covenant humility, kneel, and bow before him. So let's stop trying to be in the position of the greater party of the covenant. Stop thinking that God's grace is owed to us or we deserve it. Instead, let us see what covenantal love for what it truly is, the comfort for our troubled souls.